Our life is a magic trick and we are all magicians. And my introduction of Darren is he's a magician. We should pay attention to what he's got to say. Woo! So that's it.
Good evening. How is everybody? Okay, so
Hang on, let's set up Darren.
Is that the magic wand?
we're going to talk about a lot of different subjects this evening. I've taken an executive decision and we're going to touch on some of the things that were projected that you were coming here for, but there's a lot of people in the crowd tonight that are seeking remedy or answers of processes to possibly use in the courts. Now firstly, I must say before we continue that I'm not here to give legal advice. I am not a practicing lawyer, okay, or a barrister or a solicitor. But by definition, I am a lawyer, as most of you are. And if you go to Google and you look up the meaning of lawyer, you will see that a lawyer is one that studies or practices the law. And then it says especially a barrister or solicitor, but not exclusively. So that covers us as lawyers. So as a lawyer and not being a barrister or solicitor, you're not partaking in lawyering. And lawyering is the act of being a barrister or solicitor for money, okay? So it's quite interesting, the actual term lawyer. So was anyone aware of that? No, I wasn't aware until not too long ago. So now it appears that I've come up here a couple of times in the last few months, and there's a lot of people who are having a little bit of trouble with a few different issues, anything from the police to local government. There's also a few bigger issues that people are having, you know, where they're being forced into the upper courts. But I do believe most of you are probably concentrating on like the magistrates court or the county court. So let's talk about those courts. So when you go to the magistrates court, a lot of people are, before I continue, just on what I was saying earlier, this is not to be considered to be legal advice. I'm just sharing my experiences and how I've dealt with certain matters, and you can take what you want from those experiences and you can adapt them and use them for your own methods. So when you go into a courtroom, has anyone been into the magistrates court here? Most of you? And have you noticed that there's usually a process that happens where it appears very like an administrative process? Now, once again, I'm not going to make very many claims tonight. I'm just going to tell you how it appears, just as you're expected to appear in the court. So, has anyone ever noticed that when they walk into the court, they will call your name, so they will say, "Is Mr. Dixon here?" And you'll say, "Yes." And as soon as you say yes, you've accepted that you are that entity. And everyone's aware what I'm talking about. They're talking about the estate trust that the government set up for you at birth. Now, that estate trust that was set up for you at birth, there's many people that say it was done without consent and it doesn't apply to me. And well, unfortunately, along the way, you have done or used this particular estate, and your parents have used it, and you've shown a habit or an ongoing
Intent?
well, an ongoing
Enjoyment.
exactly, an ongoing joinder between you, the man, or the woman, and this particular estate that that the government are administering for you. So when you go to court, what's happening is they're administering your estate, and there's presumptions that the court work under. So a lot of the time you go there and all of a sudden you say, yes, I'm Mr. Dixon, you get up and all of a sudden, bang, there's a fine and you're out of there and they haven't listened to you and people are wondering what's going on. And what's going on is there's a presumption on the table. There's a member of the government there, whether it be local government or the police or it's some sort of government agent. And the presumption on the table is that they're there to administer your estate. And this is the thing that you don't know and you're not aware about. So when you go in there, if one wants to not appear in that capacity, so for example, as the estate, one would have to rebut the presumption or put a bigger presumption on the table that can't be rebutted. So when one appears, and this is the thing, you'll notice that there's some conjuring and there's some magic going on because they want you to appear. Who normally appears? Magicians, rabbits out of hats, those sorts of things. They're the things that appear. So what they're doing is they're conjuring you to appear as the dead, as a spirit. And that's what's going on. That's the game that they are playing that you are unaware of. So now when you appear before court, what ordinarily happens is, as I said, the police, let's call it the police for the moment. The police are administering your estate. And before you go into court, there's a little process that they do. And the process is they ask you for what's called a pre-case conference. And in the pre-case conference, what they're trying to establish is whether, well, it's a game of poker, let's call it. And they're asking you to show your hand. And they want to see if your hand's better than their hand. Okay? Do you have some evidence that will trump our evidence? So, is everyone pretty much done a pre-case conference? You'd probably be the same amount of hands that will go up if you've actually attended the court. You can refuse, but sometimes it's good to do a pre-case conference. I actually found out about this and I started to practice to try and rebut the presumptions in the pre-case conference and make the police withdraw before we went into court. Now, that was a little trap that I fell into because for a start, if you go to the court and you have the pre-case conference and you show your hand, okay, and they see that you've got a better hand, they will say, well, look, you know, because of this, because of that, they'll tell you a story and they'll say, look, it's your lucky day, I think we're going to withdraw on this matter today, so you don't have to go into court and we'll withdraw the any prosecution, we'll withdraw any conviction that we're seeking and you won't get a fine and you jump for joy. You think it's a win, but it's not a win, it's a withdrawal, okay? And for example, you must take note that if they withdraw, that means if they want to withdraw, that means they're going to lose. Okay? And if they're going to lose, there is the possibility for you to get some costs. Okay? So I remember, I'll give you an example as a reference. I went into court, into the magistrates' court one day in the city. And it was actually the first time I'd ever been to the magistrates' court in the city, the Melbourne Magistrates' Court. And when I was there, I was on the ground floor, and I'd never been there, and if anyone's ever been there, it's quite an interesting building. And I was just standing there looking up the architecture. There's a big foyer with a grand sort of ceiling. I won't call it a grand ceiling, it's a large ceiling. And there's a staircase that goes up the centre, but it's an interesting looking foyer. And I was standing there checking it out. I'd been upstairs to a friend's case, and all of a sudden there was an altercation over in the corner, and there were two gentlemen, and I just heard some yelling and some scuffling, and then all of a sudden these two PSOs appeared, and they basically pretty much jumped on these guys and arrested them. And, oh, sorry, I'll tell a lie. There was two guys, but they only arrested one. And so one of the PSOs was taking this gentleman into custody and taking him out to the back room in the court. And all of a sudden, the second police officer turns around, and he's a bit agitated, and because the situation's being escalated, so he's running off his adrenaline, and he looks at me. And he points at me. And he goes, "Are you with that group? Are you with that group?" And I'm like, I'm turning around thinking, who's he talking to? And he's talking to me. And so he comes up to me and he says, "Are you with that group?" And I said, "No, I'm not with any group." And I said, "I do believe there's no association laws here in Victoria, that's just Queensland. And even if I was with the group, what relevant bearing has that got on anything?" And so he said, "Well, I think you're with that group, so I'm going to escort you out of the courtroom, out of the court." As I said, it was in the foyer. We're right next to the main door. So he grabs me and he escorts me out of the court.
That's assault.
What a dog.
That's assault. He just assaulted you.
So he takes me outside, and as we get to the door, he releases me outside the door. And by that time, there was another officer there, and the officer says to him, "Did you get his details?" And he says, "No." And so he comes out of the court, and he says, "Hey, I need your details." And I said, "I haven't committed a crime though." And he said, "I need your details. It's part of the Court Security Act. And there's an act that governs the security of the court, just in case there's some sort of a threat or someone with a weapon or something like that. It's more so for that and for the good order of the court and the business of the court, so it doesn't get usurped by people who are belligerent and wanting to yell out and that sort of thing. Or maybe people who are trying to take weapons or things like that into the court. And, you know, as we know, the security and everything. But that's another story. So he asked me again, "Give me your details." And I said, "Well, I don't have to." And he says, "But the Court Security Act says you do." And I said, "Well, I'm happy to give you my name." Okay. And he says, "No, I want your licence." And I said, "No." And he said, "Give me your licence." And I said, "No." And he said, "Give me your licence." And I said, "No," 3 times. And then he said, "If you don't give me your licence, okay, I will arrest you." And I said, "But I'm under no obligation to give you my licence." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I'm not driving a motor vehicle." And for some reason, he took this as me being a smart ass. And I wasn't being a smart ass, I'm just familiar with what the law states. And the law states that you must produce your licence when driving and when asked to do so. But it's not compulsory. So I'll explain that a little later. So he gets angry because I say, well, I haven't got my licence. And he says, well, I need to ID you. And I said, well, I'm happy to comply upon you providing me the law, statute or act that obligates me to do so. And he says, well, it's the Court Security Act. And I said, no problem. And I gave him my name and my address. And he said, but how can I verify that? The Court Security Act says that you have to produce identification when asked. And I said, but there's nowhere else in the law that compels me to carry identification except for your act. And how am I aware of this obligation in your act if it's not an obligation out in the public? And I do believe that there is no law that can compel you to show identification, or to carry identification, should I say. I won't say carry, I'll say to actually show some identification. Oh, sorry, not show, to carry. So, and if someone can show me a law that can compel you to carry identification, then I'd like to see it, because I'm yet to find one. The only one is when you're driving, there happens to be an obligation to carry a licence when you're driving a motor vehicle, but there's some exceptions to that. I do believe the Road Safety Act provides that it applies to a driver who is under 25 years of age. A driver who's under 25 years of age must, okay, carry his driver's licence, okay? So that's the only obligation that I can see, okay? And when I read that, what that says to me is not that if you're under 25 you must carry it. What it says to me is if I'm over 25, I don't have to. For some reason, I like to reverse engineer things. So when you reverse engineer things with law, you tend to find remedy and the true meaning of things. So anyway, what happened was he arrested me, and he took me inside, and he took me into the office, and he called the police. And the police came, and they came up to me and they said, "How are you today?" And I said, "Yes, good." And they said, "Can we get your details?" And name, address, the whole works. And we hear you don't have any identification. I go, "Yeah, I don't." And they're, "Okay, well, we need to ID you." And I said, "Well, can you show me this law that obligates you to ID me, apart from this Court Security Act? Because there's a legal maxim that says you cannot do that which is impossible." Okay? So, if you don't have ID on you, can you produce it?
No.
So, how is there an obligation? If you don't have the identification, you don't qualify. I haven't carried identification probably for about 8 years now, and I know that I hear often that people get issued with fines for not IDing themselves when they're pulled up in their car. But I'll get back to that in a minute. Let's continue with the Court Security Act. So the police say to me, "Well, where's your identification?" And I said, "Well, it's in my motor vehicle, so I can access it when I drive my motor vehicle." And this was the time when I did carry it. Well, I didn't carry it on my body. I left it in the vehicle. So they said, well, can we take you to your vehicle? And I'm just, yeah, okay. So they take me out into they took the cuffs off and everything. And these police were quite good and polite and they were really nice to me. And when we walked out of the court, they said, so what happened? And I said, well, yeah, this... And I told them the story, are you with that group? And then I basically, and I said, yeah, these PSOs, they're out of control. They don't seem to know what they're doing. And he seemed to agree with me and said, yeah, we have a lot of trouble with them. Because they're not trained as a police officer is trained. And they're more for a security type job. So that what they've basically done is they've turned security guards into officers of the law.
One of these. One of these.
And look, some of them are really good. Some of them are trained, the ones that actually take the time to read up and train themselves, but a lot of them are just, you know, they seem to have a chip on their shoulder like a lot of security guards do.
Playing dress-ups.
We've all been to a venue or gone to somewhere where a security guard's giving you a hard time for no reason, and there's sort of that mentality going on. So anyway, to cut a long story short, they take me to the vehicle, and I produce the licence, and they say, happy days, see you later. And so about 9 months later, I get a summons in the mail from Victoria Police saying, you refuse to give your identification, you've been charged with an offence under the Court Security Act. So, as I do whenever a policeman approaches me and issues me some sort of an offer, I always nominate to go to court. So I nominated to go to court, and I went to court. And I was in this practice stage when I was going to court, and I was practicing. Actually, maybe I should use a different word, because it's lawyers that practice, or barristers and solicitors that practice. But I wasn't lawyering, so I was just practicing my own techniques. I was going to court to see what the court process was, how it worked, because if you go there without going and having a look at that, you can just get thrown in the deep end and you don't know what's going on, which is a bit of I think it's something that everyone's experienced. And I experienced once, and then I decided to go and have a look and see how the process worked, and you know, get a few hours under my belt watching a few court cases and understanding their processes. So I went to court for this particular charge, which was refusing to provide identification. Maybe there was another one, I can't recall. I think I've got the paperwork there. I can look at it later and show you in the break. But so I thought, I'm going to go and have one of these pre-case conferences. So I walk into the police prosecutor's office, and I start talking to this police prosecutor, and he said, have you got your paperwork? And I show him, and he's, okay, yep. And he's, what have you got? Show me your hand. And I said, well, I said, I do believe you don't have the right to force me to carry identification in a court, and I do believe your statute that imposes that on me has been written beyond power, because there's some common law rights that one needs to be aware of, and one is that if you've never done anything, if you haven't actually broken the law, you don't have to engage with police, okay? And so, number one, I was forced on the day to engage with police when I hadn't committed a crime. They just wanted to engage with me because they thought I was part of some group that they had seen in the courts. And so, what I did was I brought up some case law, and there's a case called Carver versus Watson. And there was a gentleman named Magnus Carver who was a passenger in a vehicle, and I do believe he was. They were driving in the Collingwood area, or the Fitzroy area, somewhere around there, and they got pulled up by police. And Magnus was a passenger, and he got a little bit annoyed that they'd been pulled up, and so he decided, oh, well, our location that we're going to is just over there, this block of flats. So he decided to get out of the car, and at that stage the police started engaging him and asking him who he was, give me some identification, and he told them to off. And so he just started walking away, exercising his liberty to do so. Because for some reason the police were under the impression that although the driver was under the Road Safety Act, and that's the act that they were engaging to pull the driver up, they were under some sort of impression that Magnus Carver, as a passenger, that he was actually under that obligation as well to provide identification, where it's only the driver that has possibly an obligation. And once again, we'll get into that after this story. So he's walked off to these flats, and the police kept on following him and engaging him, and he became more belligerent, and he started swearing at them, telling them to nerd off. And so they arrested him, and they put the handcuffs on him because they arrested him for indecent language. But they were the cause of his grievance, so, and he had a right to walk off. He was under no obligation to speak to them. He was under no obligation to provide his name, his details, a licence, any identification. So what happened there was they robbed him of his liberty. And so I brought this up with the police prosecutor when he said, show me your hand. And I also brought up another case called the DPP versus Hamilton, which is a similar case where the gentleman's liberties were stolen once the police pulled him up. And so we had a bit of a banter in the pre-case conference in regards to this. And after about 20 minutes, he actually knew these two cases, and he started asking me questions, testing me if I knew what the cases were about, and just checking that I hadn't seen it on YouTube or some website, and was just throwing a name at him, hoping for the best. And so I had a bit of a chat to him about it, and then I quoted Justice, I think it's Justice Kay that was the justice in the case, and he said, there is no statute that takes away your common law right to have to stop and talk to police. Now, if you Google that case, Carver versus Watson, all these quotes are in there, okay? And you can use those quotes.
Can you spell Carver?
It's K-A-B-A versus Watson, and you all know how to spell that. And I'm not sure why, but his actual name is Kalba, K-A-L-B-A. You'll see that in the case transcript. But for some reason it's titled Carver versus Watson, and throughout the case they refer to him as Carver. So once again, I'm not aware of why that's happening. But so there's, and I do believe there's some case law from the Northern Territory from about 1971, somewhere around 69 to 71, in regards to a gentleman who had the same situation where he was forced to engage with the police when he hadn't committed a crime and provide identification. And we've had a couple of chats up here before in regards to this, and we actually had the police were in attendance in the rear car park here behind Magpie House in Upwey, Victoria. And there was a gentleman who went out to his car, and he came back in and he said, oh, the police are out the back. And I'd been telling it was a similar meeting to this, and I've been telling them about how to engage with police and what to do if police tried to take advantage of your liberties and tried to engage with you in an incorrect way. There's nothing wrong with police in, talking to you. I talk to police all the time, Actually, Nick and I were out the front at the last meeting, and there's a railway station across the road, and there were two PSOs standing there. They saw us there, and they stood there and were sort of having a look. And look, it was 1 o'clock in the morning. You've got to use your noggin. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. There's two people that appear to be loitering out the front of some shops, and so they were just keeping an eye on us. And I just yelled out, "How you going, fellas?" Just letting them know that we were friendly. We weren't there to loiter. We're just having a chat. Two blokes having a chat on the side of the road, not doing anything suspicious. How you going? Happy if they had to come over and talk. But anyway, earlier we'd been outside talking to the police. This was the time before I was here. So we're engaging the police outside the back here. And sorry, the gentleman came in and said, "Oh, the police are out near my car." And we went out the back, and I said, "Well, would you like me to show you, a way to engage with police without, being taken to task and without being belligerent towards them?" And so I went and put what I told the group into practice. And I went up and I started, just walked straight up. And there was one thing that I did notice. There were two police officers, a very friendly female police officer and another grumpy male police officer. And they had a prisoner with them. And I'll call him a prisoner because one thing I noticed was he had a white and blue top on that came down past his groin. Big white and blue stripes, like the old white and blue striped prison uniforms that they used to wear back in the colonial times. And I saw that, and that struck me as very unusual. And the reason why is because the gentleman who came back in to tell us the police were out the back, he's actually in the no licence and registration gang. Okay? So he'd gone out to get back into his car and drive off, and there just happened to be this other guy in his blue and white striped top, and this gentleman had told us that the police were out to get him. And when I walked out, what he told me in the meeting, I could see it and I could validate it because I was thinking there's two police there, there's this other gentleman with his car, and he's got this blue and white striped top on, and he looks like a prisoner. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. If more police had come along, that's obviously, the sign they know which person is not the prisoner, but looks like the prisoner. So maybe he was there to assist, maybe he was a police officer, I don't know. I'm just making unsubstantiated claims right now. I'm just going off my gut feeling of the situation. And so we went up and engaged the police officers, and I started talking to the female police officer. She was very friendly, and I spoke to her for a few minutes, and then the male police officer came over, and he was pretty grumpy, and I tried to engage him. He wasn't very interested in that. And then after about 10 minutes of conversation, where I was just being a friendly guy, the male officer comes back up to me and he goes, "Right, mate, that's it, that's enough, move on." And why do I have to move on? And he says, "Well, I've given you an order to move on." And I said, "Well, but I'm not loitering. I'm here engaging with you guys. We're having a good friendly chat. I don't understand why you've asked me to move on. Have I broken the law?" And he walked off. And that's one of the things that I say to police when they engage with me on the street, is if a policeman comes up, it quite often happens in the city, police will walk up to you and they'll say, if you're waiting for some friends on the Flinders Street steps or something like that, there's always police around. And they'll walk up to you and they'll pull out their notepad and go, "Can I just grab your details, mate?" And you're like, "Why?"
Practice for him, that's all.
And I've asked them why, and they go, "Oh, we just need to justify to the sergeant back at the station how we've been spending our time." And that's a bit strange. And strange but plausible. And I think it's a way just to get names of people, because if there's a crime later, they can use your name and they can maybe pull you in. But once again, that's just a hunch. Okay? I don't know. But so, the best way to deal with that is to say to them, "Have I committed a crime?" What normally happens is they will put their notepad away, okay, and they will usually walk off. And I've tested out a few other things, like when they've done that, "Mate, can we grab your details?" And so I'll just say things like Carver versus Watson. And surely enough, they walked off. And the reason why I said that is because I've spoken to some police who had recently been through the police academy, and they were telling me that that was one of the cases that they teach them. So I just thought I'd test it out and see if they knew of that case. Because what you're doing is you're letting the officer know that you know your rights and that you don't have to engage with them if you don't want to. So, getting back to the pre-case conference. When I'm in the pre-case conference, as I said, I've shown them my hand. And this went on for about 20 minutes. And the officer decided, he said, in not exactly these words, "You've got 4 aces, and I've only got 4 kings. So I'm going to withdraw." And I thought to myself, wow, that's pretty powerful. You know, just knowing these 2 cases that I'd read, and I knew that there were liberties that I was entitled to, and if I hadn't committed a crime, which I hadn't, and I knew that if the police engaged me, okay, and then a crime happened from that, and it was through their engagement, that I'm not responsible, because they're not meant to be engaging me, because I'm just exercising my liberties. So, now, I walked out of there going, that was pretty good. I didn't have to walk into the courtroom. But since then, after revising that, what I've realised is that that could have been an opportunity to make some money. Because my hand was better than theirs. And what they're telling me is that they're going to lose if it goes into court. Now, if they say in the pre-case conference, I want to withdraw, they can only do that with your consent. Okay, so you're in control, because remember, they are the ones that have brought you there. They're the ones making the claim. Okay? So, and he who maketh the claim beareth the burden of proof. You'll hear tonight I'm going to use some legal maxims, and these legal maxims are very important to know and to possibly learn, because I throw these legal maxims at police sometimes, and that makes them yield as well. So, you know, I know a lot of younger guys that sometimes are walking home from school and they've got to go to the station, and you know the PSOs are there starting early, and they're doing the collecting names and hassling kids, searching their school bags, you know, just basically engaging people without any right to do so. Some would call it harassment. Okay? I wouldn't. I do believe that they have actually a duty that's been bestowed on them by the state. And the duty is to, well, it's to raise some money for the state so the state can pay for its debts. Because the state's bankrupt. So they're just doing their job. And if you read the police oath, which we'll look at later, it's very important when we're going to look at that, they have to fulfil their duties, not just their oath, which is to keep the Queen's peace. They have a duty to perform any duties that are bestowed upon them by their masters, okay, which is the commissioner or, you know, their senior officers. So always remember when you go to court, okay, there is an opportunity to make money. Okay, and the reason why I'm saying that is because when they take you to court, they think it's their opportunity to make money also. So don't think that I'm a greedy guts or Darren's just money hungry. He just wants it. No, I'm just saying that if you've got a better hand, if you've got the 4 aces, okay, you should go into court because number one, you've been damaged in a way because you've taken the day off work, so you're going to lose a day's pay. You've possibly invested money into some evidence or some documents and you purchased some books so as to use in the case. And although it's a nice carrot that they dangle, for you to walk out of the pre-case conference without entering the courtroom, it's very enticing not to take it. So it depends on what you want to do, because I know a lot of people just do not want to go to court. And I understand that. It's very intimidating sometimes. And because you're not in there every day, like the police are, people just don't want to engage that sort of environment. And the reason being is that the police are contract experts, and so are the courts and the court staff. They are experts at contract. And I'm not sure if you all realise, but life is a contract. Everything in life is a contract. Every single thing. So, for example, let's look at the seminar. You came in, you paid your entry fee, you came in here with an expectation that you were going to receive something. So there's a meeting of the minds, okay? Basically, there's valuable consideration put, your entry fee, and there was a meeting of the minds between me and you that I was going to supply you with some information and some knowledge that you can take away and do with whatever you choose. So there's one type of contract. What about when you're at home and you're with your children? Go and clean your room and you can have a bowl of ice cream. Go and clean your room and I won't send you to your room for an hour. Go and wash my car or you won't get the PlayStation. So everything in life is a contract. You don't realise that you're contracting every time that you engage with people. What are you doing next Saturday night? Would you like to go to the football? Yes, okay, bang, it's a contract. There was agreement. Sorry, there was an offer. There was agreement, and there was an acceptance. That forms a contract, a basic contract. So when you get into more detailed contracts, you know, there has to be valuable consideration. But you could look at this contract, the valuable consideration would be that it's 2 friends sharing good times together. So you can always adapt the principles of contract to, you know, these very basic contracts of life. So Now, let's take a look at a few things.
What was the name of that second case again?
Sorry?
There was Carver and Watson. What was the second case?
It's called DPP versus Hamilton. Or it's... the DPP versus Hamilton is the appeal. And I do believe it's, if you want to look up the original case, I think it's Hemingworth versus Hamilton.
The Watson v. Carver was overruled by DPP v. Carver.
Sorry, I'll have to get you to speak up.
Watson v. Carver in 2013 was passed by Justice Duncan Reynolds, and then in 2014 Judge Bell said that doesn't apply. So he passed...
No, let me explain that. So what you're talking about in the first trial in DPP versus Hamilton...
oh no, sorry, DPP Hamilton is there, but Watson v. Carver
Yes?
was quashed by Justice Bell in 2014 in DPP v. Carver. So the first one, which is Watson v. Carver, it said that Section 59 of Road Safety Act doesn't apply.
Yes, I'll explain that. So what he said in the first case was there is no statute to take away your common law right to stop and have to talk with the police. And he said neither is Section 59 of the Road Safety Act a exercise of power to have to stop for police in your motor vehicle. Okay? And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the magistrate was correct in the first one, in the first half, which is there is no statute to take away your common law right to have to engage with police. Okay? And then he did, as you just brought up, the second part of the ruling, which was that Section 59 did not provide a source of power for police to pull you up in your motor vehicle, and that part of the ruling was quashed. So, but if you rewind your recordings and you listen, I never mentioned the Road Safety Act part of it, because we're not here focusing on that. We're just focusing on that you have a common law right to not have to stop and engage with police, especially if you haven't committed a crime. And I'm not saying don't engage with police, because police are there to protect you, okay? Police are there as part of the community, okay? The police do a lot of really good work, okay? Contrary to a lot of people's belligerent attitudes that they think all police are bad because they've had a bad experience with the police. So they say, well, if I had a bad experience with these two police officers, then all police are corrupt. And that's a really bad trap to fall into. Police do play a particular role in society, and they're there for protection. But if you are belligerent towards the police, you will feel the full force of the law, as many people have, due to their belligerence. So that's unfortunately the way things work. If you are belligerent towards the police and you have broken a law, the police have an obligation under their oath to follow through and engage the statute upon you and charge you. Now, a lot of people in I'm not going to, well, let's say there's a lot of people out there that have the attitude that all the laws are invalid. And I've heard this one that, the Road Safety Act is invalid, and it's an interesting argument, because this is the thing. Law is created by custom, okay? And if people engage in a particular behaviour, and that becomes the custom of the community, then that becomes the law. So, for example, there's lots of people out there that refuse breath tests, and they feel that for some reason they're above the law and they don't have to have a breath test. And yeah, it's an inconvenience to be pulled up and given a breath test, but you've got to think about the benefits, okay? For these obligations, okay, you've got to have a look at the benefits. Like, for example, one good thing about breath tests is that you can confidently drive down the road knowing that the police are out there policing drunk people, and it's safe for you, your mother, brother, sister and loved ones to drive down the road, okay, and not be hit by a drunk driver. So, in effect, that custom of breath tests is probably a pretty smart law, because what it does is it brings safety to the community. Would anyone disagree?
The only thing is the drunk driver doesn't have any insurance. Once he's drunk, he doesn't have any insurance.
Correct. Correct. But
Doesn't matter, you do.
but the thing is, through your registration, you pay a TAC insurance, and the insurance covers you because you're not drunk.
Yeah.
And this insurance also applies to you if you are a pedestrian. So even if there's a drunk driver and you're a pedestrian and they hit you, their TAC insurance still kicks in and pays for you because you've been damaged.
Yeah, comprehensive doesn't matter.
Yeah. So there's all these, although there's these inconvenient little things that you have to do sometimes, there's massive benefit from them. And
debatable. You can always say that the police may encourage a chase with a drunk driver. The drunk driver might otherwise get home and go to bed, but that he engaged with a chase, and then more people die.
What police normally do in that situation is they don't get into high-speed chases anymore because of the very reasons that you've said, that you know, there can be fatalities, and police will usually follow at a distance and they'll follow you home, and then the law allows them to give you a breath test for, I think it's up to 2 hours.
3 hours.
3 hours, thank you. So they can actually breath test you for 3 hours after you finish driving, and that sometimes that's a little bit dangerous because you know, what if you weren't drink driving? What if you weren't drunk and you just swerved? And you weren't drunk, and then you went home and had a drink.
Don't wash up.
Sorry?
Don't wash up.
Don't wash up?
Don't wash up your glass.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally.
If they follow you home, like I've had cases where the police have followed me, and once I pull into my house, they just turn off.
Yeah, they can't breath test you on your own private property.
Is that the law? Because I was being intimidated.
What about someone else?
They cannot breath test you on your own private property, especially if you didn't give permission to come on your property.
What about someone else?
I don't know about somebody else's property, but on your own property, they cannot breath test
If
you.
you go inside, they don't know who was in control. They don't even know where I live.
That's right.
So what the gentleman said over here is probably correct. You know, they follow you home, and you pull in, and what they've done is they've kept the Queen's peace, and they've made sure you got home, and they know now that you're not going to be a danger to anyone on the road. I'm not saying they're going to let a drunk driver, you know, off the hook. Maybe you swerved accidentally. Maybe you were tired, and maybe they followed you for 5 minutes to see if you were going to do some more erratic driving, and then you pull into your driveway, and the police go, well, there is no danger now because that person's gone home. And I remember when I was young, police would often give you a warning and not issue you a fine, and they would say to you, don't let me see this vehicle on the road again tonight, or I will fine you. So they use their discretion, which they still have, but very rarely engage because they're under an obligation to issue a certain amount of infringements.
It's disgusting.
Unfortunately, it's become part of their job. So, but
30 a month.
they have the duty. Yeah.
30 a month, if they don't get 30 a month, they get disciplined.
Yep.
And if it happens 3 times, you're out the door. Yeah. You know,
30 fines a month.
no, if it happens 3 times, if they don't get their quota, they're out the door, they're not a police officer anymore.
Are they expected to get 30 fines a month though? Is that
They have to get 30 fines a month.
each individual?
Each police officer has to get 30 fines a month.
So that's like 1 every day, it's disgusting.
The BMWs are going to be paid for.
That's right. How do you think they got those BMWs?
So I don't want them to have it.
Yes.
Is there any,
Anyway, to put a check and balance on safety.
Sorry guys, can you take it down? Sorry, question?
Is there any check and balance to put in place for this use of safety? I see in workplaces where they use the excuse for safety for all sorts of crazy shit. And the safety, I agree, for drink driving, but someone's got to suspect a case of coronavirus, all of a sudden you're a prisoner against your will for 2 weeks on a ship, or in a, but where I'm at, where I work, it happens there, I'm stuck for 2 weeks, not going home. Against my will, I'm not sick, but as precaution, this safety shit, as I said.
Yeah, there...
Is there any way to sort of, how can we mitigate against crap like that?
Look, it's very difficult because those laws have been around, they're quarantine laws, and they've been around for a long time. But people are saying, you know, oh, but the Biosecurity Act, it's brand new, and yeah, it is, okay, but what they're doing is they're escalating the powers, okay?
Like
and
panic almost.
Well, yeah, because it's there's a projection that there's a virus that can do a lot of damage, and there's a projection that a lot of people have died. And I don't know about you, but I've got no way to confirm that. I know lots of people have sent me videos, and there's people wearing masks, and I'm going, but where's the evidence?
There's a German court case from 3 years ago.
Yep.
Where a gentleman made an allegation that it's never been proven that a virus has ever caused a disease, and he was taken to court by a drug manufacturer, and the drug manufacturer lost.
Oh, there you go.
And that was in Germany.
Do you know the name of that case?
No, but I listened to it today and couldn't find that.
Okay, that would, I'd love you to let me know what the name of that case was.
Yeah.
We can swap some case law.
Yeah.
So this is the thing with this new Biosecurity Act. I haven't read it all. I've read there's a section, I think it's section 3, and it's the detailed outline of the act, and it's broken up into I think it's 10 chapters, and of those 10 chapters, the one that I found most interesting was chapter 9, which says that they can come onto your property at any time without any sort of warrant, and they can, without your consent, do whatever they like. And
What do you mean, do whatever they like?
well, for example, if you're refusing to take a vaccine.
No one's going to lift a finger because no one wants to get the virus. So
They've done it in the
you
States.
only have to be a political activist, and who's going to help you?
And one thing that I did notice was there's a memorandum type site in regards to it that provides all the information of the bill. And what happens in Australian law, because the government have signed the Human Rights Treaty, they have an obligation to make sure that all laws are consistent with human rights. And it's quite interesting because in regards to human rights and the law, what they do is to enforce their laws to take away particular liberties. They issue what's called a human rights, it's a human rights certificate. I can't remember the exact other word that describes it, but it's a human rights certificate.
It's a waiver, isn't it?
It's basically a waiver, exactly.
It's called that. I think it's called a human rights waiver certificate.
It's not waiver, it's something else. It's compliance certificate, human rights compliance certificate. And what the minister who introduces the Act, what he does is he makes a statement that, in his opinion, the Act is compliant with your human rights. Now, I read that on the Biosecurity Act, and I found it quite troubling that they said that it was compliant with your human rights, because they take away the right of consent, they take away the obligation to get a warrant. The vaccines are untested. I've done a lot of research on vaccines, and I've actually been affected by vaccines that I've taken. And the last one, I stopped taking them after that. I've only had the ones when I was a kid, and then I went to a particular country in Europe, and all of a sudden, and I'd been there before, and all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, you have to get this vaccine because there's this particular bug in the forest, and if it bites you, you'll die." So I took this particular vaccine and had an adverse reaction, and it put me in hospital in the foreign country. So, but yeah, so I find it very troubling that they're saying it's compliant with your human right when there is a human right to not be experimented on. And if these drugs or vaccines have been untested, then you're being experimented on. But the government say that's compliant with your human rights.
Medical treatment without consent.
Medical treatment without consent, yeah.
That's what the US military did in the 1950s and 60s to their soldiers.
Yes, they did. It's many times. John Wilson, how are you, my friend?
Being a devil's advocate, let's follow some reasoning. The minister says that he believes that this law is compliant. He hasn't made a fixed statement that it is compliant, but he's made that statement that allows him to bring in laws, or the Parliament to bring laws in, that forces you to prove that your human rights are being imposed on. Would that be your belief?
Yes, yes. And I've actually challenged some human rights in court myself. And it's a momentous task. Let me say that to you.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up before about if you do challenge authority, you know, just the cost, you know, the time and the energy, and like you're almost go insane, and yeah, just like is it worth it? Like, are you going to get shot? Well, I've taken on a few superpowers, and I mean, it almost killed him, you know. Yeah,
you have to weigh up going to court, especially if it involves your family. Because a lot of people can be damaged just through the process.
But the cost, I mean, most people can't afford to do it.
That's
it's like going to a casino. You think you're going to break the bank, but you know you could win and be bankrupted, or you know, it pisses a lot of people off. Like, you know, they death threats.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I was single, so it didn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, it was sort of.
London calling.
Yeah, that's the Queen.
Is that Queen?
Shall we answer it?
Yeah.
Okay. No, he hung up. That was Neil calling from London. So I'm not sure if everyone in the room's aware. There's a group of concerned Australians, and I'm one of them. And we've lodged a challenge to jurisdiction.
Oh, that is the Queen.
Answer it.
It's Neil.
Yeah, okay.
We're all say hello.
Hello, Neil.
Hi, Neil.
Just hold on 1 second. Turn the camera off.
pay.
Yes.